This week on Inside Scoop.
I love terror.
Are we on the verge of a new Middle East?
That the fate of Europe will never be irrelevant to our own.
A Rubio run in 2028?
You have a whole bunch of cities that are actually going in the wrong direction for Democrats.
A tale of two blue cities.
I think the Supreme Court ought to be ashamed of itself for a lot of reasons, okay?
And the power of the Supreme Court. Welcome to Inside Scoop, where we talk about all the news that's fit to print in the Washington Examiner magazine. I'm Jim Antle, your host. And this week, Marco Rubio is a man who wears many hats: Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, interim head of various federal agencies, and our Peter Laffin asks whether he should also be presidential candidate.
He wanted to play big boy.
Right now on the Republican side, the assumption is Vice President J.D. Vance is the overwhelming frontrunner for the 2028 Republican presidential nomination. That's how the line of succession would run, and certainly that's what most of the polls say.
We are going to get my husband's friend, J.D. Vance, elected for 48 in the most resounding way possible.
But after Rubio's speech at the Munich Security Conference, many people started talking about whether Rubio might be a better representative for the Republican Party in 2028.
We are connected spiritually and we are connected culturally. We want Europe to be strong. We believe that Europe must survive. Because the two great wars of the last century serve for us as history's constant reminder that ultimately our destiny is and will always be intertwined with yours.
Vance and Rubio gave very similar speeches, but Rubio was able to get a more positive reception from Europeans and from some people who've been critical of the Trump-Vance administration. It raises a larger question about whether 2028 is going to be a competitive Republican primary at all. So if so, there are some other candidates who could potentially get in. Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, as he tries to repair his relationship with President Trump after running against him in 2024.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, for doing this. I mean, you have pedaled to the metal on so many different issues, from national security to border to energy, and you're not taking the pedal off any of that. And I thank you for that, because this would not get done without your leadership.
Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, who may be a representative of the pre-Trump GOP and old-line conservative movement with a defense of evangelical Christians and, of course, the State of Israel.
I came into Congress 13 years ago with the stated intention of being the leading defender of Israel in the United States Senate. Right. And I've worked every day to do that.
But there are a lot of Republicans who worry, based on what happened with the Democrats, first under Joe Biden and then when he was replaced by his Vice President Kamala Harris, that not having a competitive primary process may not set them up to be strongest in the general election. They look at what happened with Biden and Harris, and many people think maybe other Democrats, including some of the Rust Belt governors, could have been stronger presidential contenders. Would it be better, even if Vance ultimately ends up being the nominee, to have real competition? One of the factors that is going to loom large in this race, of course, is going to be Donald Trump. The president is going to have a lot to say about who his successor might be, and he does keep raising Vance and Rubio, or some combination thereof, as a good ticket to replace him potentially in 2028. Republicans have a choice to make. Should Marco Rubio, who has said that he plans to support Vance if Vance ends up running, take a second look at maybe running in 2028 himself in his own right? Do Republicans need a competitive primary process to put their best foot forward in 2028? Or is there a Republican presidential contender that we're not even talking about yet who might be the best representative for the party in the next election? What do you think? Comment down below. Are we on the eve of a major transformation of the world's most troublesome region? This week I'm joined by editorial director Hugo Gurdon. And Hugo, you wrote a cover story for this week's issue that sort of examines that very question.
I think the thing that most people look at when they see American forces go into the Middle East and they're combined with the Israelis in this extraordinary attack on Iran is, how do we get out of there? Will it be successful, etc. And most of it, according to the president and the officials senior in the government, has been about neutralizing Iran as a threat with nuclear weapons, with missiles, with terrorists, and its navy, of which the majority now seems to be at the bottom of the sea, having been sunk. But there's a bigger picture here, and that is President Trump, in first announcing the attacks, called on the Iranians, after the bombing campaign is over, to take control of their own government. And he has even amped that up. So there's a lot of talk, obviously, about how far his ambitions go and the extent to which this is about toppling the clerical tyranny that has been in charge there for 47 years. Mm-hmm. If it's possible, and it's of course a big if it's possible to topple a regime primarily or indeed exclusively from the air with bombing campaign and missiles, the question is what comes afterwards. Most people would think it can't get much worse than a regime which has had death to America as its principal guiding light or slogan for all this time. And perhaps it is possible that Iran, having attacked the other the moderate Arab Gulf nations, will encourage a sort of coalescing around the Abraham Accords, and other Arab countries will join the Abraham Accords to create a kind of new Middle East in which the American-orientated Arab countries and Israel will establish a sort of a different kind of Middle East, not so dominated by the Islamists, which would allow America to turn its attention to other fields, such as its confrontation with China.
And so that does seem to be one of the big debates that's going on about this campaign, is whether this is an example of the United States once again getting enmeshed in the Middle East, as opposed to doing the pivot to China that now multiple administrations, including multiple of the Trump administrations, have promised. Or is this sort of the end? Does this represent the end of these types of interventions?
Yes, well, that's obviously it's a question which I don't think you and I have discussed before and is discussed, and that is this war one which will end or diminish America's need constantly to go back into the Middle East, or is it one which actually just gets us bogged down? Now, the president has said that he only wants to be in this attack epic fury for 4, 6, possibly 8 weeks. Mm-hmm. That certainly does not include a ground invasion and an occupation. So he certainly at least has conveyed the idea that we get out quickly.
And I think you'll see it's going to be a short-term excursion. How good is our military, right?
The big question is whether that can produce the wholesale change that everybody would like to see there. Right. That's what's wanted. But there have been too many setbacks for the United States in that region over so many decades that one cannot be complacent about the result or about success. One can certainly hope for it.
So there's a lot of focus on Israel, and Israel is obviously engaged in this conflict alongside us. Yeah. But as you mentioned, the Arab states, there are many Arab states in the region that would also like to see a substantial change in Iran.
Yes, there are. And although Israel is the nation primarily under threat from Iran, the fact that Iran has fired missiles into more than half a dozen other countries, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, etc., shows that they have always been, they are now and they have always been the principal threat in the Middle East to the region. This can work in two different ways. One of the incentives to join the Abraham Accords, which President Trump introduced in his first administration, one of the incentives to join it was Arab countries feeling that they needed some sort of alliance because Iran was a threat. So there is always the possibility that neutralizing Iran will reduce the incentive to join the Abraham Accords. Firing of missiles and the attacks on neighboring countries might cement the idea that Iran is the threat, and it is much better for those countries. They might see themselves as being much better advised to be allied with the United States and with the dominant military power of the region, which is Israel.
Thank you, Hugo.
Thank you.
If you're watching us on YouTube, you can read Hugo's full article by clicking here on our digital magazine. Two blue cities, two different trajectories. I'm joined this week by Washington Examiner commentary editor Conn Carroll. And Conn, you've written a piece for this week's issue looking at San Francisco and Los Angeles, two cities that are run by Democrats, that we think of as very liberal cities, but you note that they're sort of heading on different paths right now.
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say. Look, in San Francisco, you have Mayor Daniel Lurie, who, I call him a cheerleader, but I mean that positively. He's out there on TikTok and Instagram constantly, not just promoting the city overall, but individual businesses. And it's not just that promotional effort, but it has translated San Francisco into increased tourism, decreased crime, decreased homelessness, decreased vacancies throughout the city's storefronts. Housing prices are still up, rents are still up. It's not perfect, right. But Lurie has really taken the city in a more, I would almost say conservative, but I'm sure he would probably say moderate. Sure. His idols are Dianne Feinstein and Mayor Bloomberg in New York, who I think we would all recognize as a more moderate mayor. And when he came into office, he said, we're not going to tolerate open air drug markets. We're not going to tolerate tent cities, and he has taken them down. They are now prosecuting people who break into cars. Things that past administrations would just let slide, they are now trying to reestablish law and order and make San Francisco a place people want to go again.
And that's not what's happening in Los Angeles under Karen Bass, is that correct? Right.
So with Karen Bass, you have a machine politician, right, who is controlled by government unions. She has no independent power base. She can only get elected by getting the endorsements of AFSCME, SEIU, all these unions that basically run Los Angeles. And because of that, she is just not able to make the reforms that Lurie is able to come in and do, because she is beholden to these power interests in Los Angeles.
So in the 90s, we had a lot of badly run Democratic cities, and it got so bad that some of these cities ended up electing Republican governors.
Giuliani, Bloomberg, right.
Right, most prominently in New York City, but Los Angeles also elected Richard Riordan. Democrats in some cities have seemed to want to handle this within their own party, but that hasn't really been the case in every major Democratic city that's faced some kind of discontent
you really
over
see
misgovernment.
Different trajectories. Look, you've got New York City, you've got a liberal democratic socialist in charge now who's tolerating violence, and I think they had 80, 100 homeless people die in the city because he does not tackle homelessness the way he should. You have another literal democratic socialist elected in Seattle recently, not to mention the one elected in Chicago. Right. And as bad as Karen Bass has been, there's now two democratic socialists that are trying to replace her. So as much as you've seen progress in some areas like San Francisco, you have a whole bunch of cities that are actually going in the wrong direction for Democrats.
So with this advent of democratic socialism, particularly at the city government level, right, is San Francisco a viable model for Democrats?
I would say yes, hopefully. I think what makes San Francisco so different than Los Angeles is the proximity to Silicon Valley. Right? You have all this tech money that come in, and they gave a ton of money to Daniel Lurie, but it wasn't just a one-off thing where they invested in Lurie and then left. They really have invested in a whole bunch of other political entities. Grow SF is one of them. So this is an entity that now makes sample ballots, that knocks on doors, that funds and initiates ballot propositions, both state and locally, to help San Francisco's business community. And this is a source of power within the Democratic Party that just doesn't exist in LA and doesn't exist in a lot of cities, just because you don't have that huge cache of business-conscious money in Silicon Valley, just every place where you find Democrats in charge of cities.
Thank you, Conn.
Absolutely.
If you're watching us on YouTube, you can read Conn's full story by clicking here on our digital magazine. The Supreme Court tariffs ruling has sparked questions about the separation of powers. Our Madeleine Coyne explains what the proper scope of judicial authority is.
Is deeply disappointing.
Last month, a 6-3 Supreme Court decision in Learning Resources Incorporated v. Trump struck down a wide array of the tariffs President Donald Trump imposed last spring. The majority was split on its reasoning, but ended up agreeing that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977 did not grant the president the authority he claimed. This case confronts not just a question of executive power, but judicial power. Is a fight like this really the proper domain for the Supreme Court? The court believes it can render a judgment, but that reflects the seemingly limitless ambitions of the modern Supreme Court. In Federalist 51, James Madison does not mention the court directly. Instead, he explains checks and balances for the executive and legislative branches as, quote, the means and motives to resist the encroachments of the others. From this perspective, the court has no role to play. The two branches work out their relationships, and if one breaches trust, the other can respond. The modern view of the judiciary is that while other branches may determine the meaning of the Constitution, decisions made by the Supreme Court are final and can only be overturned by a constitutional amendment or the court itself. Neither the president nor the legislature has any means of defense against an attack by the court.
Very unpatriotic and disloyal to our Constitution.
It's as if the constitutional system now must be read through Alexander Hamilton's Federalist 78, which introduced judicial review. The court gets the last say on all matters and how power is distributed in our republic. This development has happened slowly over the last 100 years, which has made the court's changes hard to notice. In a country of 350 million people, the balance of political power depends on just 5 unelected judges. Not even the most aristocratic of the founders would have wanted so much power among so few. I'm Madeleine Coyne for Washington Examiner. And back to you, Jim.
Thank you, Madeleine. And you can read the full story and all the articles we've discussed in today's show in our Washington Examiner magazine. This has been your Inside Scoop. I'm Jim Antle, your host. We'll catch you next time.